Hi, I'm Anayah, and I'm going to be presenting about the Rwandan genocide, which happened from the 7th of April to the 15th of July in 1994. So how did this genocide start? So back in the day, in the colonial times, during the Belgian rule, the Hutus and the Tutsis, two ethnic groups in Rwanda, were had a bit of tension between them. Why? Because the Hutus were considered less than the Tutsis. The Tutsis were more privileged, they had more advantages over the Hutus because the Hutus were just peasants. Um, because of this tension, a civil war broke out and a peace treaty was created in order to be signed in an attempt to keep the peace and get rid of the tension. However, a plane which had the Rwandan president Habyarimana was shot down and the peace treaty was shattered. On April 7th, 1994, the Hutus led parties around to the villages, slaughtering any Tutsis that they would find. Here's a bit of history of the genocide. So in 1959, the Hutus revolted. In 1990, the Civil War broke out. In 1994, the plane crashed and the genocide started. And on the 15th of July, the genocide ended. So here are the 8 stages of genocide. The first one is classification, which, an example of this would be that the Tutsis were separated and identified by using these identification cards. Symbolization. An example of this would be that the Tutsis were called names, such as cockroaches and tall trees, because of their characteristics. Dehumanization. The people called Tutsi slaves monkeys and never called them by name, basically comparing them to monkeys. The Hutus used the identification cards to attack Tutsis, and the addresses of Tutsis were broadcasted on the radio so that people could attack them. This is an example of organization. So, polarization. Hateful propaganda was spread throughout the radio, and people were warned not to associate with Tutsis, and they called them names. So, preparation. They allowed an anti-Tutsi youth group, Inter Harmway, to set up roadblocks on the capital road. They started exterminating and picking out any Tutsis they could find, and they also prepared arms such as guns, bullets, grenades, poison, swords, and machetes. Interahamwe set up roadblocks around the city, and there were killings every day. They killed any Tutsi they encountered. There were killings every day, literally every day, and the Tutsis were taken to camps to be exterminated, and many were starved and tortured. So the UN actually denied that the genocide even happened. They tried to cover it up as much as they could. Victoire Ingabire, a woman who funded the genocide and started it, was arrested. However, she denied in ever taking part of the genocide, and she tried to make it look like there was never even a genocide in the first place. So here's a first-person account. This woman's name was Consoli Nishimwe, and she was 13 years old when she experienced the genocide. She's now 32, and here are some excerpts from her interview. So this is when the genocide started, she could see signs that it was going to start. Here it says, however, the situation got worse when we started hearing local radio stations calling Tutsis cockroaches and snakes, explaining how they were going to kill us, and then the genocide happened. This made her very isolated, especially in school, and all her friends just didn't want to be her friends anymore because of what they heard on the radio. And it says, so my family and I, as many other Tutsi families, are forced to run away from home and hide. I still remember how scared my parents were, but as children, my siblings and I thought the mayhem would stop soon, but that was not the case. 800,000 people died over 100 days. That is the biggest amount of rapid killing since World War II. Here's a map of Rwanda. We can see the eastern, the northern, the western, and the southern parts, and the capital, which is Kigali. Here are some images of what the Rwandan genocide was like. Unfortunately, we can see how people suffered and how people were starved and the amount of people that there were there. And also over here, we can see the poison, the skulls, the aftermath. So how did the world react to this? Well, the UNAMI and the UN, I think, so the UNAMI was a bit more concerned about it than the UN was. The UN just totally denied it. They didn't want anything to do with it. They didn't raise any awareness about it. However, the UNAMI warned people and different countries several times with urgency. For instance, the US, France, and Belgium declined to send additional help to Rwanda, basically choosing to ignore the mess. And they were warned several times, like I said, with urgency from the UNAMI about the Hutus' extermination plans. The Belgians eventually decided to pull out of the UNAMI because some of their soldiers were killed. This reduced the soldiers from 4,500 to 260 troops overnight. However, not until mid-May was when the UN finally realized that there could have been acts of genocide that took place in Rwanda. They decided to send in 5,000 troops and 50 personnel carriers. However, these troops were further delayed because of the arguments between the UN and US, which was based on costs. Even if the troops did arrive, it would have been too late to actually do anything about it. So here is a quote that I decided to include. It says, "I decided it is better to scream. Silence is the real crime against humanity," by Nahedza Mandelstam. This we can see is really important, that we don't stay silent about these kinds of things, and that we need to speak up, and that the countries surrounding this genocide should have stood up and should have said, "Hey, I don't think this is correct. You need to stop." So, what was the aftermath of this event? Were the perpetrators, were they punished? The two main leaders, Edward Karamera and Matthew Njirumpatsi, were found guilty of genocide, sexual assault, extermination, and crimes against humanity. They were charged for life in prison. The ICTR, created in December of 1994, charged those responsible for crimes against humanity. So thankfully, they were served what they deserved. Here are my citations, and I hope that you enjoyed my presentation. Oopsie.